My name is Michael Gulotta. I'm from New Orleans, Louisiana. I have two restaurants named MOPHO and Maypop. Food philosophy. I think, always evolving is a good one. And because, my first restaurant was sort of just pow flavors, everything, as much flavor as we can jam into a dish, which is kind of the New Orleans way of cooking. Except we kind of added a lot of the Southeast Asian elements to sort of change and brighten up the New Orleans cuisine. So adding ginger and galangal and lime leaf and curry leaf and all these things to traditional New Orleans dishes. And suddenly there's this sort of new hybrid where everything is very, very in your face cuisine. And I think now, though, I came up training in classical French and Italian and even German kitchens. And so I think now I kind of want to start moving back towards that, or finding a happy medium, moving back to clean, like with the new restaurant that we have that we just opened, kind of moving towards cleaner flavors. And so kind of finding my way, because now I've gotten so used to these really big, powerful flavors, I'm not sure if I know how to go back. So that's kind of the struggle at the moment.
So can you tell us about a make or break moment in your career?
Currently having one. Now having two restaurants and trying to figure out how to pay the bills at both. So I'm kind of standing on the edge of a make or break moment at the moment. Does that make sense? Make or break. I mean, it's never really been like that. I think it's always just been showing up and working. And so, I've always been kind of a firm believer of a decision is neither good nor bad. It's all on how you follow through. And so, I left a very high job in a big company, working for a great chef and a huge team and a restaurant that had multiple awards, and I was the chef de cuisine, and if I would have stayed there, technically I would have always been taken care of, but there's a ceiling to that. And so you sit there and you're like, well, do I want to take this chance and go and open a restaurant and sign my name and everything I own away and all that fun stuff? And at the moment, and when I made the decision, it was 100% hell yes. I was like, all right, let's just do this. Let's just see what happens, because you only have one life to live, right? So that was a big one. And then trying to figure out something that would be fun and new and different. I didn't want to leave and do something that was very similar to what I was doing, which was high-end tasting menus, that kind of thing. And obviously that has been a big trend for a while. It's just stepping away from fine dining and doing something more casual. And the casual aspect was fun because it's something it's a restaurant that I know can always be busy. But there are real pitfalls to that. We struggle at MOPHO. Our guest check average is $22 a head. And it doesn't matter how many great cocktails we make and how many specials we run at night, the lunch average is $18. And then the dinner average maybe 50 or even 60 at points, but no matter what, it is consistently for the past 3 years. Our restaurant is now 3 years old. We have never been able to break the $22 a head threshold. And so coming from a restaurant where it used to be $80 a head to running a restaurant that's $20 a head is a massive shift in your personal reality and how to make that function. And you're like, oh my God, we got to do 500 people a day, in an already busy city that has a ton of great restaurants. And we went to a location way out of the way in a strip mall. And so it's sort of this, it's working now and it's kind of fun and funky. And people think it's cool that we went and took over an old bookstore at a strip mall and made this really kind of funky, tavernish style restaurant. And so I go to that restaurant now and I feel this sort of, wow, this is really cool that we were able to accomplish this. But it's almost like they don't let me in there anymore because I tinker too much with the food, because I did fine dining for so long that I'm always tinkering and messing with things and trying to make things fancier than they need to be at MOPHO. MOPHO's food needs to be casual. It can't be anything else. Whenever we try to push that boundary into something a little bit more high-end, there's a pushback from the guests. They don't want it. They want it to be a place where they can go and let down all their defenses and just relax and have a good time. That is now what MOPHO is. And so that's almost why now we've moved in this new place, Maypop, where we can sort of go back towards that and try to go to a higher guest check average. Maybe, obviously, I think nowadays even getting back up to an $80 a head guest check average consistently in any city is getting almost impossible. So now we look for a $40 a head, or even if we're lucky, a $50 a head. And it's a question of how do you do that? Because the bottom line is, if you want to pay for the more well-trained managers and the better trained chefs and all those things, there is no we're fast losing the time when you could, like with me when I was a line cook, I worked for $7 an hour, and that was in 2002, which isn't that long ago. I worked for $7 an hour and lived on a friend of mine's couch and caught the streetcar to work every day in New Orleans. That's fast dissipating. Maybe not in San Francisco and New York, but definitely in every other little city. People aren't just going to work for free anymore. So we have to figure out how to make that work. And there's almost should be somewhat of a lament to that we all ran to fast casual because that's where the money was. Like, it's kind of scary that we're losing people who are doing really higher end food and higher end wines. I think they're always going to be there, but it's sort of dissipating as to who can do that. And so I think it's tricky and it's daunting to some of us that all we ever really wanted to do was really fun, innovative food, but sometimes there's a roadblock there. And we find ourselves almost being forced to do fast casual because that's what's working. Now, is it great and does it make you feel good? I still go to MOPHO every morning and get my breakfast. I get a quart container full of pho broth with all the fixings, and it's awesome. It warms your soul, and it's the most amazing thing ever. And if I were to go to a restaurant on my day off, I would go to MOPHO. So it's like, it is my comfort zone. That is where I would want to go for my day off. But if I'm in a restaurant, then I want to be at something more like Maypop, where I can tinker with the food and change things weekly and change the menu daily if I want to. It's a really tight line. It's a really short menu. And it's built for speed. It's built for an organized, clean walk-in. It's built for... Actually, that's a lie. It's not built for speed. It's a small menu, so we can manage it with a smaller crew, but do really nicer things on the plate. Whereas MOPHO, we have this huge menu that we can't even change anymore, because if we change anything, there's riots in the dining room. So it's this... And all of this is very new. Maypop's only 3 months old, so it's sort of... I'm figuring this out as I go. Like, how can I make Maypop work as almost sort of this mid-range. It's this new mid-range. It's not fine dining, but it is doing nicer things on the plate. We're trying to bring in foie gras. We're trying to bring in uni and all these things. And can we find our market there? I can only name maybe 3 restaurants in all of New Orleans that are still putting foie gras on the plate. And so that's one of those. I don't like that. I don't think that's the coolest thing. I don't think that's a good thing. But I also understand that it's more comfortable to go to a casual restaurant.
So let's talk about your professional journey and how you got to where you are today. I know you worked for John Bash at August, and you were away in Europe, and then Hurricane Katrina hit. Can you tell us about what happened after that?
I always say that's sort of where my life went completely out of control, and I've just sort of been holding on. I've been behind the 8 ball since Katrina. So, I was very methodical in who I worked for before that. I worked for John Folse. I did my stints with Emerald. I worked for Besh. And, I only worked for Besh for 2 years when I went to go work in Italy and Germany. And so I was living in Europe and living that the Italians didn't pay me, so I worked for free and lived above a tool shed. And then the Germans paid me really well. And so I was living in Germany, like living it up, making good pay, working at an awesome hotel. I was the butcher, getting to butcher whole animals. So literally like living this cook's dream. And then Katrina hit, and so I'm like, well, I got to go home because that's where my family's from. And that's literally where my life just went, it just went from zero to insane. Because the moment I got off the plane, Chef Besh was he was at a perfect point, and while it seemed a terrible point because he just bought a restaurant and then the city went underwater, he turned that into such a growth, such a rapid expansion. He just filled a void that was there. And so suddenly I'm in a restaurant group that goes from 2 restaurants at the time of Katrina to 6 years later having almost 12 restaurants. That's crazy rapid expansion. And with each of them being a different kind of restaurant, not like taking one model and expanding it. Each restaurant was a totally different restaurant from the one before it. And so to be in the middle of that and to be helping train chef de cuisines and sous chefs and management, and they'd cycle. Every person that I would train up would then go and be a sous chef at one of the new restaurants. Everyone had to go through August Kitchen before they could go and be a management position, or they had to go through August as a restaurant, which is where I was the chef de cuisine, my brother was the general manager. Everyone had to go through us before they could go and be a sous chef in any of the other restaurants. That was kind of it's not that way anymore, but for the first 3 or 4 years, that's how it was. So we were constantly cycling sous chefs through, constantly cycling new cooks through. It was just a crazy time, and, August still had to stay at that pinnacle restaurant. So it was like ludicrous speed. You were just constantly running. And at the same time, John was bursting onto the scene as a celebrity chef, and so constantly flying to do dinners with him everywhere, and invaluable experiences, things that to be his number two at the time, and to be at one point in California doing a dinner, and then being flown directly to the mountains for what's the film festival in Salt Lake City, and then being flown to New York to do a dinner there, and that could be all within a month. And you're just like, oh my God, this is insane. But you also learn to be way outside your comfort zone almost all the time. You're constantly walking into unfamiliar kitchens with unfamiliar teams and learning how to calm them down and get them focused and put out a great dinner. And then jump back to August and check on that place and make sure that the new trainees are doing their job. And so it was a really crazy, crazy time. And then I guess it was at that point where everything at August kind of slowed down, and the rest of the group started taking on a life of its own, where I was like, well, I don't really see anywhere else for me to go in this company. So now I'm at this point. I could just stay and run August for the rest of my foreseeable life and probably take home a good paycheck and have benefits and all these things to take care of me. Or I could just keep the craziness going and step out and start my own restaurant group. And so I chose the more insane version, which is fun. The funny part now is that, so when I it's hard to think of it, when I stepped out of the best group, I was 32 going on 33, and now it's almost 4 years later, so now I'm like 36 going on 37, and your body changes tremendously from that. Like, you just start running out of energy, and you're like, oh damn, I've never run out of energy before ever. I've been able to outwork everyone around me for as long as I've known, and now suddenly I have to tell my cooks, guys, I gotta go take a break, which I've never had to do ever. Like, that's never been a thing. And now all of a sudden it's like, whew, I'm really tired. Of course, I also have 2 kids now and all these other things. So yeah, to suddenly have like 2 5-year-old boys, 2 new restaurants that are both under 3 years old. Suddenly your body's like, this is kind of, we got to take a break, and you're not used to that ever. You're always used to being able to just outwork and make up for your lack of experience and knowledge with intensity. And so now I can't do that anymore. Now I have to find a way to lead and to pump up the cooks so now those 23-year-olds and 25-year-olds and 28-year-olds will work the way I was working when I was that age, so I can take a mental break, because otherwise I can't do it.
So besides hard work and intensity and perseverance, what other personal qualities have helped you succeed?
Stubborn. I think just being stubborn. I mean, it's one of those things, because, I learned some lessons from people that I was around. I was lucky enough to be raised by a woman who always, no matter what, she was like, you can do whatever you want to do. That's a huge difference from a lot of people. As you come up and you meet other people that are around you, and they were raised by people who were negative, they inherently question what's going to happen next, to the point where they won't take the chance. And the interesting thing with me is I've never had that, so I've always just like, I can make it work. And it's hard, because now I'm at that level where there are failures. Things do go wrong. I don't win every time now. Like, there are scary days where I'm like, okay, this restaurant isn't taking off as fast as we thought it would. We're not going to be able to, so now there's these truths that are suddenly becoming prevalent, where now we have to be like a reed in the wind. We've got to be able to change things on a dime, be able to change plans of attack, to be limber and be fluid. And that's kind of a new feeling. So I don't know. In the beginning, it was the ability to just keep showing up and pushing through. So I guess, like you said, just perseverance, and just not always thinking that if I stick to it, it will come out right. Because I think it's almost different. It's a different from being like, I can make it work is one thing, but to be thinking like, it will work. I think the scariest questions now are, what is the food world going to look like in 10 years? There was this rapid expansion of food knowledge, almost like anything else, like just like with computers and technology, and that rapid expansion. Now that we can all communicate, we can all when I started culinary school, you had to go research through books if you wanted something. Now you can just jump on the internet and find what you want. So the problem you have with that is, while it really helps some people, someone who has spent the years putting in the time, they can build off that knowledge and go use it. It also makes other people who maybe aren't quite ready yet to go off and make, I can open a restaurant because all this knowledge is at my fingertips. And they realize that there's so much more to it. So I think the one thing I try to tell people is that if the restaurant route is the route you want to go, you need to make sure that cooking is the least of your concerns. You need to make sure that you know how to cook and explain how you want something cooked to someone with such ease that that should be at the way back of your mind at the end of the day, because you have to worry about so many other things to keep a restaurant open: taxes, payments, liquor license, all these things that are ultimately your responsibility. And thankfully for me, I have partners. There's another odd thing that people ask you, like, "What are you going to go out on your own?" I'm like, "Out on my own? What are you talking about?" "Oh, you have those partners." I'm like, "Those partners save my life on a daily basis." When I can't go to City Hall, they're the ones going to City Hall. When I can't go to the meeting with the accountants, they're in the meeting with the accountants. Like, this is a business at the end of the day. And if it's not running, like, I get to come and do wonderful things like this while one of them sitting in an office crunching numbers right now. So, and I even, those were fights that I had with, it's like, "Well, it seems like you work so much more." I'm like, yeah, I do, because I'm the lucky a-hole that gets to be on magazines and on TV shows and things like that. Whereas my business partners are the guys who are in the trenches every day. They don't. So I'll give them 2 days off, and I'll work 7 days a week. Well, the cool thing is I lucked out in being able to. I scored a lot of good hits on who I worked for. I got to work for John Folse, who he's like this grandfather of cuisine in the South. And just the way he sort of presides over a restaurant is a very cool thing. Almost like he's like the big papa figure who's just coming around and checking on everybody and how you doing and this and that and shaking hands and he doesn't really cook anymore. He just looks at what you're doing. He's like, "Wow, I wouldn't do it that way." It's sort of like that, which is super cool, because he's just been he's done things that you couldn't even imagine. Like, he cooked in Russia during the Cold War as like he did these, so you don't take him seriously because he looks like a doddering old grandfather, but he's done these amazing things that you're like, that's insane. President of the ACF and all these things, and this all happened while I was still in grammar school. So it was really cool working for him and still being friends with him, because I went to his culinary school in Thibodaux, Louisiana. So it was really cool getting to work alongside of him. The chef that I worked for in Italy was amazing, just because he was that quintessential Italian chef. He was, he and his wife ran the restaurant, so they'd be yelling at each other at the top of their lungs. And you're like, "Why are you so angry?" He's like, "I'm not angry." You're like, "What?" Y'all are literally like just, screaming at each other. But they were the best people, and you went on your days off. You went and ate family meal at their house with them, and it's all those stories that you hear. It's true. When when you're in Italy, they bring you to eat at their home, and you sit at the family table with them, and they serve you, and it's an amazing thing that I even feel like I fail at. It's the American culinary scene is so frenetic. It's like you're constantly going. It's like, well, sit down and have a meal with your staff. Like, I don't have time for that. I got to make sure that I got to go do this and I got to go do that. And so to see that, like, those are things that sometimes I don't appreciate that I feel like I should. My chef in Germany, he had Michelin stars and gave them all up because he wanted to serve what he hunted, and so that was super cool. We'd bring in. He had a butcher shop inside of his restaurant where he brought in on the hoof animals and butchered them down, and he was another one of those ones where other chefs sought his restaurant out because his food was that food that chefs craved. It was old school, traditional. He'd roast a whole top round of a deer and then just carve it and mid rare and serve this really delicious sauce over the top, and that was it. And then did a really great handmade Spätzle or handmade Knüpfle or handmade Stumpfnudeln and served on the side. It was just the things that these German chefs craved because it was stuff that they grew up eating as kids, and so that was really cool to see. And then of course working for Chef Besh, where it was just watching someone who was just skyrocketing. And how they managed that, and how they ducked and weaved and took those turns of a rapidly expanding company, and how to keep everyone in each restaurant focused. I mean, I lucked out in being able to work for a lot of really great chefs all in a row. The biggest mistakes are just not listening. Every kitchen's different, and I always remembered everywhere I went, I had to learn their rules. And so you have to kind of be able to be a chameleon. Every kitchen you go into, no matter what you brought from the one before, you've got to go in and learn their procedures, because now it's weird because I haven't worked in another kitchen except for my own in so long, and even when I left August, it was a culture that I had helped develop. But it's been over a decade since I walked into a kitchen that I wasn't running. But I remember going to different kitchens, and every new kitchen I went into, you just sort of stop and just become a sponge. Like, don't go with being like, oh yeah, I know what I got that. Like, that drives me nuts. And I know it's like a natural thing for people to say. You'll ask them, you're like, okay, so this is what we're gonna do. They're gonna go right, and you're like, right? And they're like, yeah, right. Like, so you already know what I want you to do? Yeah, right. Like, okay, we'll do it, and they do it wrong, and you're like, so he wasn't actually the cook wasn't actually saying right. He was just saying, okay, I understand. So it's like a little thing like that like you're like, so this is what I want you to do, right? Oh, so you already know. So you've done this before, cool. And it's like a little bitty thing, and then because it spans, because then the chef de cuisine comes to me. He's like, I was showing him how to do it, and he kept saying right, so I thought he knew how to do it, and then he didn't know how to do it. But and so you come off as being this arrogant person when you didn't even mean to. You're just nervous. And so the hardest thing is to literally let down those defenses and just be a sponge. Be like, I don't know what's going on. Just from top to bottom, I will work as fast as I can. Like, being honest with your chef, because it's too often there's so much machismo in kitchens. There's so much, and all that's actually starting to fall away from when I was a line cook in '98 to 2003. A lot of that just all testosterone is starting to fade now. But it used to be like you were afraid to even say you didn't know how to do something because you're afraid of getting fired. But that's not how it is. That's not the kitchen culture anymore. The kitchen culture anymore, it now is just come in and be honest. Like, I don't know how to do that. If you can have someone show me, or if you can show me quickly, or just walk me through the steps, I'll do the best that I can. And just show up every day and be like that. And then when someone does teach you something, you get 2 chances. You can mess it up twice. After that, you've got to nail it. You've got to pay attention. Or if you do mess it up, you've got to be able to give a reason as to why you messed it up. Oh, well, I got pulled away and I should have pulled off the heat and I didn't, and I'm sorry. You'd be surprised that if you can appeal to someone's better nature, like, this is what happened, I messed up, I promise it won't happen again, you will have a job every day. If you should come in and you're just and you approach it from that vantage point, then you'll be fine, because at least the chef knows that you care. All right, he messed up, but he or she messed up. They knew exactly what they did wrong. They know why they messed it up, and they now know how they're going to fix it in the future. Well, that means you're critical thinking. So if you can come into a kitchen and be a critical thinker, I mean, well, there's a fine line. Critical thinker, but don't come in and start just changing things without telling anyone. That's not cool. That's also not cool. Even today, I learned something cool just walking over to one of the other chefs prepping something and just asking, hey, man, what are you doing? This looks really interesting. And he gave me a full description of how he was making a fava bean tofu. And I'm like, that's awesome. I never would have thought of that. And it's just those kind of things. Just walking, events like these are always great. And it's why no matter how much stress it causes my team, I never say no whenever I'm invited to some kind of event to be around other chefs, because they're all in their own cities. They're all in their own little microcosms, and they're doing something cool. And when you put us all together, even if we glean one point of information that we could come back and do a new dish and that dish becomes a smash success, it's worth all of that. Because it's it's a battle that's fought in inches, and if you can just learn a little bit more to get you a few more inches, then it's amazing. It's amazing. So, always reading. Although, to be quite honest, I can't even read cookbooks anymore. I want to, but to sit down and actually read them requires so much time. There's I can never find enough time to actually sit down and just read a cookbook anymore, even though it used to be my favorite thing to do. And I think I'm striving now to be able to find the time to literally sit down in a quiet place and just pour through cookbooks like I used to. And it's almost the same thing. It's just seeing where other cooks are coming from and what their approach is, and being able to glean something from that you can then take back to your kitchen and be like, look, this is an awesome approach. I think we should, let's, how we've been doing it this way. Well, let's take what we've been doing and just work in. They had one little trick that worked better than ours. So, that's the idea. I don't know. And sometimes I feel like, am I getting to the end of my ability to keep creating? But, there's chefs who've been able to do this for so long and to keep doing it so well and to keep innovating and changing who they are that, I don't know. I think that's the trick, is just how do you keep fresh information coming into your mind and keeping yourself fresh to keep thinking? Because the biggest soul sucker of creativity is stress. And once you're owning restaurants, there's so much stress that there's days where the stress is literally paralyzing. Where you're like, I don't know what to do if we don't make payroll. Because there's days where you sit there and you're like, I don't know if we're going to make payroll. And if I don't, the one thing my partners and I always said was that no matter what happens, the staff makes payroll. So if they show up to work, we pay them. There's never going to be that day where they come in and work us a week for free because we can't get to the next one, because there's no way to pull back out from that. So it's that whole thing of sitting down being like, well, I don't know if we can make payroll. And so how do you create a new dish when you're sitting there worrying about that? But the creation of the dish is what you need to get more people in the door. So it's sort of this Pandora's box. We wanted to make a place, or we wanted to build a restaurant where there was no real industry restaurant in New Orleans. You know, like in New York, you have like Blue Ribbon or Spotted Pig, where there's a place where cooks and servers and everyone wants to go eat the food. So that was the idea for MOPHO. The idea was simple, straightforward cocktails, simple, straightforward food, things that are just, everything's delicious. Nothing takes an overly long time. It's places where all of the industry people of New Orleans can go on their day off. Place somewhere where they would want to go, where they get really attentive service. They can feel relaxed, but everything's there that they need. And we noticed that we would all caravan and go eat Southeast Asian food. That was what we would do on our day off, and it did everything we wanted. You know, it was the flavors were delicious. There was all these fresh herbs, all these bright notes that I think we craved after eating really heavy fine dining food all day. We wanted that ethnic cuisine, and I think that's typical in every city for chefs. They search out ethnic cuisines on their day off, but you couldn't always get a good drink. You know, or you couldn't always get a really good local beer or something like that, or the other things that you craved. And so we said, well, let's just smash those together. Let's put all that together and make this really approachable tavern-esque style restaurant where people can feel at ease and get all the things that they want. You can get a craft cocktail, you can get a really good beer, you can get some really good food, and you can just tune out. And so that's what we became. The cool thing is about the whole hurricane is that it shook us out of our malaise, where we're just like, oh, New Orleans is New Orleans, and it's always going to be New Orleans. That kind of shook us up. And you kind of have two camps now. You have those that are like, we must preserve our history. Things have to be exactly how they were. And then there's some people like me who are like, no, the cool thing about New Orleans is that it's always been evolving. It takes every culture that comes to it and it assimilates them. It keeps the best parts of their cuisines and their lifestyles and assimilates them and makes, like a good kitchen, it takes the good things and makes itself more efficient and better. And so New Orleans has always done that. And now you've got a bunch of young chefs who are coming in and bringing in different cuisines and sort of broadening those horizons. But I don't know if they're all going to do like what we try to do, which is take those new cultures and actually sort of fuse them prematurely. Because that's almost what we did at MOPHO and at Maypop. We sort of hyper-evolved that cuisine. Whereas, you know, it's interesting to see what a Vietnamese New Orleanian in 5 or 6 generations, what they're actually going to cook. That's always been our approach at MOPHO, is like, what would a 6th generation Vietnamese cook who then went away and trained and came back, and what would they cook for their Acadian husband or wife who's from Acadian country? You know, like, what would they make? That's sort of always been the idea of how we approach to MOPHO's food. But how will that work with now? Like, you know, there's a lot of Israeli food, and there's a lot of Middle Eastern foods, and you know, the one thing we don't have is there's no real traditional Szechuan Chinese or Sichuan Chinese or anything like that. And so I'm interested to see if that's going to start making its way into the city. It's an interesting time. You know, we're either going to keep moving towards diversity in New Orleans, or New Orleans does have an amazing ability to make everything one. It has an amazing ability to just swallow up and assimilate everything. So I'm interested to see how that's going to work out. Because over time, it seems like every cuisine that comes into New Orleans eventually becomes New Orleans cuisine. Because it's just too good at taking those bits and just making them part of the whole. So will we continue to branch out, or will it just become homogeneous once again? Well, yeah, MOPHO is definitely always going to be casual. You know, it is a fast casual restaurant. Funny because it's not even fast. That's one cool thing about New Orleans, that people will sit. So even at MOPHO, lunches take an hour and a half. You know, and even though the food comes out super fast. So it's funny with that. It is casual. I don't know how fast it is. As far as Maypop, the new restaurant, you know, I hope that it can sort of live, because I think that's the thing. Now restaurants are living in multiple realities. One restaurant will live in multiple realities. So, you know, Saturday and Sunday mornings at Maypop, we do a dim sum because I didn't want to do brunch. because I've done brunch way too much in my life. And so I was like, I'm not going to do brunch. We're going to do dim sum because no one in New Orleans does dim sum. There's literally nowhere to find dim sum in New Orleans. And so we said, well, no one's doing it, so let's do it. So let's fill a void. Let's do dim sum because we're not going to be able to sell really high-end food during lunch on a Friday or a Saturday in New Orleans. It's just not going to happen. I mean, we struggled with that at August. We can never get lunches on the weekends to take off. Maybe you can do a brunch, but even a high-end brunch is hard to do. Usually, even the brunches are somewhat more lowbrow in New Orleans. So we said, let's do dim sum. So Friday or Saturday and Sundays we do dim sum. During the week, our food is very approachable. There's pressed sandwiches, there's pasta bowls, there's these things that we want the local business people to come in for a good lunch. And we also have some really good wines by the glass and some great cocktails. But at dinner, we have a bottle list. And we have, the meals. We want people to course their meals. And right now it's still sort of in that in between fine dining and casual, but we want that to go up. So that's kind of the thing. Now it's almost like you have to grow into a position because we don't have any kind of huge backer that can be like, all right, you just run fine dining until it catches on, because that's what you need to do fine dining restaurants. And that's why you find so many young chefs opening restaurants that are, well, they just cook the food and they serve it and they do all these things. That's the only way they can afford to do higher end cuisine, because you can't afford all these giant sommelier and captains and back waiters, and it requires so much opening capital and to be able to have that make money off the bat. And now we don't have the ability to not make money off the bat. We've got to be able to stay. We have to be able to be in the black from the get go now, because a lot of us are working with smaller and smaller opening capitals. Because there's just not much money to go around anymore. People have gotten wise to the investment in restaurants. Although, for some reason, you always see someone opening something where they've never even had a restaurant before, but they found a huge backer. You're like, how did you do that? I had years of experience, and I asked for backers, and everyone told me no. It's like, you got to be kidding me. So, yeah. Some person just had a night, but there's a double-edged sword to that. Typically, you have to deal with an investor who wants you to put their stuff on the menu, or they want to have say in your wine list. My business partners and I, we're all in the industry together, and that's the one thing we always remind ourselves when we start to freak out about money is like, well, this is ours. We make the final decisions on the menus. We make the final decisions on the wine list. We make the final decisions on the aesthetics. There's no one walking in being like, well, I really saw this dish that I had when I was vacationing wherever, and I want you to put it on the menu tomorrow. Like, we don't have that problem, which is cool. We get to all make those decisions. We just have a lot more gray hairs because there's no one to bail us out if we go into the red.